the latest episode of Mystery Unsolved. Welcome to the latest season of Mystery Unsolved. I am, of course, your host, Justin Bienvenu, back for another season in this new year. Kicking off Mystery Unsolved for this season is the disappearance of one Ambrose Bierce. Very intriguing topic that I oddly enough didn't know about until recently, which is kind of weird because I'm an author, I'm into the Civil War, and I had no idea that Ambrose Bierce disappeared off the face of the earth, never to be heard from again. So without further ado, Mystery Unsolved, the disappearance of Ambrose Bierce. Let's have a little background on good old Ambrose, shall we? Ambrose Bierce was an American short story writer, journalist, poet, and American Civil War veteran. His books, The Devil's Dictionary, was named one of the 100 greatest masterpieces of American literature, and his story, An Occurrence on Owl Creek Bridge, was described as one of the most famous and frequently anthologized stories in American history. He was born in Ohio on June 24th, 1842. Hey, look at that, we share a birthday. Sure, he was born 100 years before I was, but gosh darn it, we share a birthday. I'll have to try to remember that. He disappeared in 1914 at the age of 71 in 72, so probably a little bit before his birthday, so they weren't really sure of one or the other. All right. So as we know, he's a writer. He was a writer, and he was also a Civil War veteran. So, and it even gives you all the battles he was in. I'll just throw a few at you. The Battle of Shiloh, Perryville, Stones River, Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Jonesboro, Nashville. All right. In 1913, Bierce told reporters that he was traveling to Mexico to gain first-hand experience of the Mexican Revolution. He disappeared and was never seen again. All right, so that's just a statement on the top. So now we're going to get a little more into it, see what we got going on. In October of 1913, Bierce, then aged 71, departed from Washington, D.C. for a tour of his old Civil War battlefield. According to some reports, by December he had passed through Louisiana and Texas, crossed by way of El Paso into Mexico, which was one of those, which was in, which was in the throes of revolution. In Ciudad Juarez, he joined Pancho Villa's army as an observer, and in that role he witnessed the Battle of Terra Blanca. Huh, that's interesting. It was reported that Bierce accompanied Villa's army as far as the city of Chihuahua. That's what it looks like, Chihuahua. I didn't know that there was an actual city in Mexico called Chihuahua. You learn something new every day. His last known communication with the world was a letter he wrote there to Blanche Paddington, a close friend, dated December 16, 1913. So a day after Christmas, or Boxing Day in Canada, he wrote a letter to his close friend, Blanche Paddington, or Partington, sorry. After closing this letter by saying, "As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination," he vanished without a trace, his disappearance becoming one of the most famous in American literary history. He wrote, he disappeared the way he wrote, mysteriously. Despite an abundance of theories, Bierce's ultimate fate remains a mystery. He wrote in one of his final letters, "Goodbye. If you hear of my being stood up against a Mexican stone wall and shot to rags, please know that I think it is a pretty good way to depart this life. It beats old age, disease, or falling down the cellar stairs. To be a gringo in Mexico, that is in euthan that is euthanasia." Wow. There's a there's a quote if I ever heard one. So in Ambrose Bierce's mind, if we ever heard tales or theories that he got shot to death by Mexicans, go with that because that's how he wanted to go out. Skeptic Joe Nickel noted that the letter of Partington had not been found. All that existed was a notebook belonging to his secretary and companion, Carrie Christensen, and concluded that Bierce deliberately concealed his true whereabouts when he finally went to a selected location in the Grand Canyon and committed suicide. Oh, okay. That's one theory. There was an official investigation by U.S. consular officials of the disappearance of one of its citizens. Some of Villa's men were questioned at the time of his disappearance and afterwards with contradictory accounts. Because what mystery doesn't have contradicting accounts, right? Watch my last video and I talk about that very thing. Pancho Villa's representative in the United States, Felix A. Summerfield, was contacted by U.S. Chief of Staff Hugh L. Scott, and Summerfield investigated the disappearance. Bierce was said to have been last seen in the city of Chihuahua in January. Oral tradition in Sierra Mojada, Coahuila, documented by a priest, James Lanier, states that Bierce was executed by a firing squad in the town cemetery there. Huh, look at that. So that's exactly how he wanted to go out. So that's interesting. All right. Now, normally I read one article, but wouldn't you know, I kind of suspected that that would be a very short article. So I'm going to read a second one. The good thing about this second article is it gives a list of theories in detail as to what happened to Ambrose Bierce. So I'm going to skip the part where we know who he is. We know he departed. We know he was a part of Pancho Villa's squad. Theory number one, he committed suicide. It's been a hard final decade or so for Bierce. Both of his sons, Day and Lee, predeceased him. Day and Lee precede him. Day shot himself in 1889 after being rejected by the love of his life, and Lee died of alcoholism-related pneumonia in 1901, as did his ex-wife, Molly, who divorced him in 1904 and died in 1905. Bierce also suffered from lifelong asthma and complications from traumatic brain injury sustained in the war, PTSD. Some believe that the whole "I'm headed to Mexico to cover the war" thing was just a ruse to throw people off the scent of his true intentions, and that in reality Bierce wandered into the Grand Canyon to end it all on his own terms. His last known communication with the world was a letter he wrote to his friend, which we know. As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination. Okay. Theory number two, he was executed by Pancho Villa's firing squad. So before I read this one, remember the ending of the last article said he was killed by a Mexican firing squad. But they didn't say it was Pancho Villas. They said it was totally separate. It was yeah, interesting. For many years, Jane Lanier, a retired American priest serving in Mexico, okay, it was her, dodgily pursued the theory based on accounts he heard from elderly locals and their descendants in Sierra Mojada, that Bierce was executed on the orders of Pancho Villa and buried in the small desert town. Lanier even paid for a gravestone to be installed in the Sierra Mojada cemetery, where he presumes Bierce's remains still lie. The gravestone reads, "Very trustworthy witness supposed that here lie the remains of Ambrose Gwinnett Bierce, 1842-1914, a famous American writer and journalist who, on suspicion of being a spy, was executed and buried at this place, 2004. Now that's interesting. If this was really the fate of poor Ambrose, at least he had been prepared for the grim eventuality. In a letter to his niece Laura, allegedly written shortly before he crossed over to Mexico, Bierce wrote, "Goodbye. If you hear of me being stood up against a Mexican stone wall and shot to rags. Please note that I think way, a pretty good way to depart this life. It beats old age, disease, or falling down the cellar stairs. To be a gringo in Mexico, that is euthanasia. A great quote. What a great quote. Theory number three, he was killed by Mexican federal forces. An American soldier of fortune named Tex O'Reilly advanced the theory that Bierce was killed before ever even meeting Villa. O'Reilly maintained that Bierce was shot dead by Mexican federal fighters while drinking at a cantina in a mining camp called Sierra Mojada. Sierra Mojada again. They assumed he was a spy, and since Bierce spoke no Spanish, he was unable to disabuse them of the notion before they dragged him to the cemetery, shot him, and buried him in an unmarked grave. O'Reilly wrote in his autobiography that shortly after the shooting, he was taken to the house where the dead American had been staying and had personally asked the owner if anything had been left behind. According to O'Reilly, the old fellow reached up behind a rafter and brought out two empty envelopes left by the American, and they were both addressed to Ambrose Bierce. Another one. Theory number four, he died of pneumonia on his way back to the U.S. Journalist Jake Silverman in 2002 explored the theory that Bierce bid adieu to the physical world in Texas, not Mexico. Silverstein dug up an old letter to the editor of a tiny local newspaper in Texas from a man who claimed Bierce's body was buried there in an unmarked grave. That man told Silverstein that he once picked up a hitchhiker who fought for the Mexican federal forces as a teenager. The hitchhiker told the story of picking up an old gringo who appeared quite sick and called himself Ambrose. Of course he did. He paid the man and his friends to help him get back into the U.S., and during the trip he talked of the many books he had written, but with the word devil in the title. One with the word devil in the title. But Ambrosia didn't survive the trip back to the U.S. and instead died of pneumonia on January 17, 1914. His body buried in an unmarked grave in Texas. It is possible that the man who called himself Ambrosia was Ambrose Bierce. Theory number five, he's still alive. Before I even read this one, let me just figure out when this article was. This article was written in 2021. Oh, it was written on my birthday. Look at that, and Ambrose Bierce's birthday. It was written 2 years ago. Okay. Theory number five, he's still the oldest person ever whose age has been independently verified is Jeanne Calment, 1875 to 1997, of France, who lived to the age of 122. If Bierce is still alive out there somewhere, perhaps hibernating in a cave in a Sonoran desert, he has beaten Janine's record by almost 57 years. That's just ridiculous. But that is the last one, so someone someone commented, I think it's either two or three. And someone put, it's five. All right. So, quite a bit of information there. So, before I ask you, of course, let's get into my thoughts on this. All right, theory number one, he committed suicide. Now, I don't like this theory, like right off the get-go, without any information to follow it. But after you read the information, it would make sense. The whole fact that he outlived both of his sons and his ex-wife died. That can really weigh down on you. but it doesn't say how he would have done it. So maybe in his own way, committing suicide would be going to Mexico to get shot. So in a way, it's kind of like it's not suicide because suicide's by your own hand. But if you're going on a suicide mission into Mexico, knowing full well that you're not going to leave alive and you don't want to leave alive, euthanasia suicide. Is that an oxymoron? All right, theory number two. He was executed by Pancho Villa's firing squad. I like this one. There's a lot to support it. He could have befriended, like you said. He joined Pancho Villa's squad. He could have befriended him. Then he could have, took him aside and said, "Hey, let me tell you the true reason I'm here." And then Pancho Villa either reluctantly agreed or was just kind of like, "Yeah, all right, no problem." Theory number three, he was killed by Mexican federal forces. So this one's the same as two, except he didn't ask someone to shoot him. But the weird thing here is if you remember the letter that he wrote to his niece, he said, if you hear about me getting shot by Mexican, like, it's almost like he knew. And that would fall under both two and three. So Bierce, in a way, must. So here's why I'm convinced. That's exactly why I'm convinced that Ambrose Bierce was shot. He was shot to death because of the letter to his niece, saying if you hear reports of me getting shot to death, and then of course the great quote that he said. So I definitely think he got shot. It's definitely two or three. He was either shot by his friend Pancho Villa and the squad, or he was shot to death by Mexican federal forces because Bierce himself knew that if he went anywhere in Mexico and there was some, federalist government people, and they heard him speak and said, Espanol, and he was just like, no. And then they took him and killed him. He died of pneumonia on his way back to the U.S. This one I would buy if it wasn't for the whole story of him being a hitchhiker named Ambrosia. Like that one seems a little far fetched to me. And then we're not even going to get into five. Would I like? Would I like it if Ambrose Bierce was still alive? Who wouldn't? But that would make him over 100. Hold on, the guy says that would make him 170, no, 180. That would make him 181 years old today. I don't think that's possible. So I think it's two or three, definitely two or three. But also it's one because technically he knew full well it was a suicide mission. So yeah, we have a bit of a short video here today. 18 minutes. Look at that. What do you think happened? Do you think it was one? Do you think it was suicide? Do you think it was theory number two? He was killed by Pancho Villa's squad. Do you think it was three? He was killed by a Mexican Federalist group. Four, he died of pneumonia in Texas. Or do you think he's still alive? Do let me know in comments. You reach out to me. You know the deal. Yeah, this has been another great video. Great way to kick off the new season and the new year, if I do say so myself. This has been Mystery Unsolved, the disappearance of Ambrose Bierce. Before I go, I would like to let you know about next week's episode, which is interesting. I believe it is going to be called Mystery on the Rooftop. And now, if my memory serves me correctly, this will be on Ray Rivera, who was the first episode of the new Unsolved Mystery, which is a very intriguing case. So do stay tuned for that. But again, this has been Mystery Unsolved, the disappearance of Ambrose Bierce. I am your host, Justin Bienvenue. Until next time.